Let's move on to the second, the way that you can doom decisions. Not only could you doom them by wimping out when it's decision time, but you could just be guessing at success. Guessing at success. There's an old scene from the old I Love Lucy show that I always remember. Desi comes home and Lucy is in the apartment. She's actually in the kitchen crawling around on the floor. And he says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "Oh, I lost those earrings that you gave me." And so she's just looking all over for it, and he immediately starts trying to help her, and he's talking to her saying, "Well, were they the expensive ones?" And she says, "Oh yeah, they're the really expensive ones. I've just got to find them." And I mean, she's just down on the floor in the kitchen looking everywhere for it. And he says to her, "Well, where did you have them last?" And she said, "In the bedroom." And he said, "Well, then why are you looking in here?" And she says, "Because the light's so much better in here." Nonsensical. I mean, a crazy idea. And yet, there are times that I think that's the way we go about making decisions. We tend to look for the easiest way to move in the direction. We don't necessarily think about what would be the successful thing, the best thing to do. We're distracted by things like, maybe what would be the easiest thing to do? Or maybe, what have we done before? Or what's the most feasible thing to do? Or what's my pet way to handle with these things? There's all kinds of these sorts of shortcuts that we tend to take rather than really trying to figure out, let's see, what would a good decision look like? We launch right into making the decision and are often kind of taken off track by the fact that we're looking for shortcuts. This is just a normal human quality. It turns out that our brains are kind of lazy. We don't really think about things from scratch. We don't kind of progress through every new thought. Our brains are always looking for some easier route. So often we base our decisions and our perceptions on things that are handier than reality. Let me illustrate this for you a little bit. If you look at this picture up here, let me draw your attention to the center square on this front space of this. What color would you say that is? Yeah, it looks orange, doesn't it? Okay. So what if I told you that it's not orange, and in fact it's just your brain using the surroundings, the easiest sort of reference points to make that decision. Let's say I took those reference points away. What color is it now? Brown. Yeah, brown. You know, and what's funny, now that you even know that, I promise you I'm not playing some joke here. I really did just take the colors that were surrounding it away. Now, what if I put them back? What color is it? Still orange, isn't it? Even knowing this, it's like you can't see it correctly, right? When there are no reference points there for you, you can see that it's brown. But when there are reference points, your brain kind of decides what color it is relative to the other things. I could do this 100 times. Truth be told, I have done it 100 times and I can never see it differently, right? I mean, this is a silly little optical example of how our perceptions aren't really formed in a vacuum or free of other ideas. We actually are perceiving things based on handy reference points. In fact, sometimes this gets us in trouble. This is a phenomenon known as anchoring. In other words, you're anchored to these sorts of things, and what you think may be original thought may be actually just based on some localized reference point. Let me give you a good example of this. This is an actual ad from The Economist magazine. And if you read this ad, you could see there that you could choose two different kinds of subscriptions. The first one says that you could get a one-year subscription that was online for $59. Or you could get a print and web subscription for $125 for a year. So look at that for a moment. Let me ask you, if you received that offer, which one would you choose? How many of you would choose the first one, the $59 for the web only? Okay. How many of you would choose the second one for $125, you'd get print and web? Okay, interesting. Well, when they asked this in a research situation, it was similar to this. About 68% of those involved said they would take the $59 option, and about 32% said that they would take that more expensive online and print version. Make sense? Now, let me ask you this. If you saw this ad and it was slightly different, let's say we add a third option here. Here we have a print-only subscription for $125. Now take a close look at this. This means that we've got a regular online-only subscription for $59, a print-only subscription for $125, or a print and web subscription for $125. Does that option make any difference?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know about you. When I first saw that, I was like, I must not be reading this right. Because that's kind of crazy. Who would ever choose that middle option? I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? But it is very useful to the people who are marketing these things. Let me explain why. Because when that third option is involved, in the second time where they did this, look at the results. Now 0% chose that middle option. Not any surprise to us, right? Because we're smart people. We knew that wasn't really such a great deal. But take a look at the difference here. Do you notice what happened? It totally switched which one was preferred and increased the money, well, I don't know, over 20%, right? Now, if you think I'm just sharing this kind of odd example as a teaching point, this is going to make you hypersensitive to the advertising that you experience, okay? In fact, Leslie and I were having a conversation about Apple products. If you ever read any of the Apple products that are out there, almost always they offer one with a certain amount of memory, a certain speed or something, then another one that you think, well, that's not that much better, and then a third one that's really a lot more than you wanted to spend, but it's clearly the best deal. Does it sound familiar? Right? This is called anchoring, because look how it affects your decision making. When we add that other option, obviously people think differently. That second option isn't there because they want people to buy the print subscription. It's there because once they've anchored you to that, you think very differently about the third option. Now, if I'd asked you that up front, I think you would have said, no, I'd never think differently. This is just the way that our brains work. We are anchored to these different things, and we make different decisions accordingly. So if we're thinking about that a little bit in terms of our decision making, we need to protect ourselves from this. We can't just launch into making a decision willy-nilly, because the truth is we may be making a decision based on something that was not what we wanted to do. For instance, I was buying a table saw not too long ago. Let me ask you, is this expensive? Some people are saying yes, some people no. Or let me ask you now, is it expensive now? It's actually getting to be a lot better deal, right? All right, let me ask you this. How about that? Or maybe if I really drove the point home excessively. Now, is this saw expensive? You know, I mean, after all, you could pay $9,500 for the Cuts-A-Lot commemorative edition gold-plated table saw. You get my point, right? That we have to be aware of these sorts of things. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to talk about what would be a good decision. What would a good decision need to accomplish? Now, I don't know about you, but most of the time, when I'm in meetings and conversations, and we come to a point where it feels like we should make a decision, we immediately start making a decision. Somebody says something, we say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Or we might work with it in sort of a dichotomous way. We might say, that's not a good option. But we don't pause to say, hey, how would we know a good decision if we saw it? Rarely do we discuss that. Let me go back to my most recent laboratory experience with decision making. When I was traveling, my wife and I were trying to figure out how it would be best for us to go from Salzburg, Austria to Venice, Italy. The locations aren't that important. It's just I never thought in my life I'd get to tell a story about figuring out how to get from Salzburg, Austria to Venice, Italy. So I just want to say it out loud, right? All right, so we're trying to figure out how to do this, and we're thinking of the different ways we could do it. And we thought to ourselves, you know, maybe we just take a plane because it'd be really quick. We'd get there really fast because we had to be there by a certain time in the evening to make sure that we could check in. And we thought, yeah, we could take a plane, but I thought, I don't want to take a plane. I want to see stuff, you know, and you can't really see anything on a plane. And she said, well, I mean, we could drive if you want to drive, and we could see all kinds of stuff because we'd have to go through the Alps and everything else. And I thought, wait a minute, going through the Alps sounds like a lot of scenery, but boy, that sounds like a lot of tense driving for me. And I'd really like to relax. And now, what we didn't stop to think was, do you realize in this conversation, we're starting to talk about the kinds of things that a good decision would guarantee. We've been trying to name those things, and we're trying to compare them to options. So let me make this apparent. Now, what I'm about to share with you is something that we call decision matrices. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to do this with every decision, but I want to show you what this looks like, because you will be in meetings and conversations where you will want to use some version of this. So it's very logical. It's not difficult, but it's something we regularly skip in our discussion. So Amy and I were first thinking, okay, we could do any number of different things. We could take a car, we could take a plane, we could take a train, or let's say we're really good at generating options. We could walk, okay, all the way from Salzburg to Venice. Right? These are our options. But before we just launch into one of those, there was a car rental place very near where we were staying, so we know where we could go to get that. We know a plane would be fast and some of that. But before we just jump into one of these things, maybe we should pause and say, wait, what do we care about? How would we know a good decision if we saw it? So you heard me just in relating that conversation start mentioning some of the things that a good decision would accomplish. Number one, there's the speed. You know, we want this to be fast enough, at least. I mentioned that, you know, I would really like to be relaxed about it. So whatever is a good decision, it would allow us to be relaxed in getting there. You might have also heard me say that, you know, I'd really like to see some things. So we'd like it to be scenic. That's an issue to us that we're thinking about. I didn't mention this, but one of the challenges was I had a nice backpack that had wheels on it, but my wife had one of those big suitcases that has 4 roughly octagonal wheels on the bottom of it, right? And I was pushing it through the cobblestone streets and stuff. So I really needed something that would, you know, not need me to schlep the luggage in all sorts of different ways. And maybe I would also put on that we needed something that was reasonably cheap. We just didn't have money to throw around, right? You see how this matrix is starting to take shape here? Now, I'm going to give you a chance to practice this in a minute, so you may want to kind of think how you draw something like this. All right? This is our chance to consider our options relative to these different things. So we kind of thought about it, and if I were to really be doing this, we would rank these on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 to 5. 5 means that it's the highest, the most favorable on that situation. 1 would be the lowest. Now, before you think that we actually sat down there in the hotel room and started graphing these things, not at all, but I think this will serve to at least demonstrate a way of thinking about these things that allows you to illuminate what would be a good decision. So if we were to do that, let me quickly sketch up the numbers on this chart here that we would have had. I think I've got those right, okay? So just to give you an example, and you could do this in a meeting, you could take some time to say, hey, let's first of all generate some options, but before we do that, can we talk a moment about what a good decision would accomplish? Tune in to some of these things. Take the time to brainstorm them, to talk among the team. You might be surprised at what surfaces or what some people are looking for in this decision and other people haven't even thought of in this decision. But once you get those down, you can take a moment to say, okay, just on a scale from 1 to 5, how do these fare? Now you can see how this works. So for instance, you know, a car was moderately speedy, right? Walking, not so much, right? The car was pretty easy to deal with luggage because once I put it in there, it just stays in there. A plane, not so scenic, right? You see how this would work? So if we added those all up on here, it's not terribly difficult to see where they would wind up. These are the totals. Okay? So what decision does that recommend? Yeah, it seems like we should take the train, and truth is we did take the train because it kind of related to all the things we cared about. It was the best decision for what we cared about. We could have rushed off to that rental car place that we knew where it was because we thought, look, we know where it is, let's just go take care of this right now. But it wouldn't have been the best decision, would it? Now I want to add one more wrinkle in this for you to practice in a moment. Sometimes when you do this, you realize that these things aren't all of equal importance, equal weight in what you're trying to decide. So often if you do a decision matrix, you might want to weight them. And in this case, I would do it like this. And if you want just a general rule of thumb, you want to rate things from 1 to 5, and you can weight them from 1 to 5 as well. So if you do this, and you actually followed through on all the math, let me show you those numbers. Which decision does it suggest would be the best decision? Yeah, it's still the train, right? But pretty obviously the train, right? Because when you start realizing how much we care about each of these things and how we would have ranked it, it's clear that there's really no question here. We should take the train, and it becomes obvious. In fact, there are some ways in which the matrix makes the decision for me, but in a way that guarantees the things that are important. That make sense? Okay. So I want to give you a chance to practice this at your tables. You will see in your materials there, you have a decision matrix. It looks like this, only probably a little neater. And what I'd like you to do is find a partner. If you're just at a table with 3, you can do it with all 3 of you. But what I'd like you to do is just run through this in discussion. But here's the key to a decision matrix. It's not about doing a perfect matrix or having perfect numbers or perfect weights. It's about the fact that this guides the discussion in a more productive manner, so that what you're talking about in your conversation is actually what would make a good decision. And sometimes that moves you more towards a good decision than any amount of the courage or just quick decision making you might have done otherwise. So take a moment here, and in your group with a partner, you can pick one of 3 scenarios. These are complicated decisions with a lot of different values. One is choosing a college. Another one is buying a house. Or the other one is buying a car. So whichever of these sounds more familiar, whichever one of these you're closer to in your own life, take a moment and just kind of sketch out for yourself, have a discussion with your partner here about what would a good decision look like? What do you need to value, and what are your options? All right? This is just a short time to try it on, so go ahead. Look, I gave you literally less than 10 minutes to work on this. Now, partly that's because we only have a very short time, and I have 2 other tools that I want to give you. I'm trying to stock you with some tools that you can use in a real meeting. And here's what I want you to notice. In that 10 minutes, do you realize how quickly you got productive? And how fast your conversation was actually helping you better understand what you needed to accomplish and how you might get there? How many of you have been in a meeting that lasted, let's say, an hour, and you were still kind of wandering around trying to figure out what you were trying to decide? Right? So in a very short order, this gets you on topic. Now, you didn't necessarily all agree immediately about what a good decision was, right? One of my favorite experiences was I walked over here to this table, and y'all were buying a car, right? So in my mind, if you asked me to buy a car, I'm thinking, well, I know exactly what we need to do, right? I know exactly what's important. And one of the first things they put, which I suspect was probably weighted pretty highly, right, was headroom. Look who's at this table. Now, I confess, that wouldn't have even been on my chart. I don't even think of there being variable headroom in cars, right? But that's really important to surface in the conversation because, for instance, it wasn't even in my thinking. I would never have thought of it. I would never drive for that. I would never value that. And yet we need to. And so if we take the time to discuss this fully, somebody in our group is going to bring that up. When we talk about us being better together than alone, this is one of the reasons we're better, is because we pool our perspectives and our interest in this. But the problem is the way we go about making decisions doesn't lead us to do that. We all have our perceptions and our opinions, but there isn't a way that we can leverage them for a common decision. And so I think this was really amazing how quickly it got you on there. Now, some of you didn't even get to a decision point, but I heard you discussing things about what you put up here and what the options were, and kind of testing, well, is this really what we need to do, or maybe not, or should we do this? And you realize that's more productive decision-making discussion than we typically have in the meetings and the conversations we have to make decisions. Right? Now, often if I suggest, hey, why don't we stop and make a matrix, somebody in the group, sometimes that's me, in fact, in other groups, is going to say, oh, really? Come on, can't we just get this done? We don't have to stop and talk about all that. But remember, we're talking about here how to guarantee a good decision, not to doom ourselves to a bad decision. And if we took the time to do this, we might arrive at a better decision. And even if we're struggling coming up with the best decision, we're going to find that our group is far more unified and that we have more fully vetted the options and the values of the decision, right? Make sense? Any questions? Anything else you discovered while you were kind of playing around with this? That's unusual. Often people can get these things right, but if you choose to weight these, that's where you start having some really productive conversation, because when somebody says, no, that's got to be times 5, now they say why. And when we discuss that, we start really understanding what we're trying to accomplish. What, Trevor?
Where the emotion comes in.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. And do we mind the emotion?
There. I love it.
Look, if it's a really important decision and people aren't acting with some emotion, there's a problem. You're supposed to really care about this, right? Now, granted, we have to manage that emotion, but this is a great way for us to take this vague emotion and reduce it to numbers so it allows us to talk. I heard some of you, when you were negotiating, when you're saying, wait, I think it should be this, one of the other things this allows you to do, instead of just talking globally about the decision, you can say, no, I want to talk about how relaxed and why I want to feel relaxed, and we can confine our conversation and be productive about it, rather than just everybody saying weird things. Does that make sense? What else? Anything else come to mind or that you just experienced that? That's a good thing to bring up too. If you are using this, one of the things that you want to be careful about your language, you don't necessarily just want to write cost, because that doesn't have a direction to it, right? You want to say cheap. So we know what's a 1 and what's a 5. So it has some polarity to it, right? But you're right, that sometimes is difficult for us to decide, and we have to really talk about what we care about. Look, it's not important that this all look beautiful, that you all write this out, nothing scratched out, nobody had to change anything, and that's not the point. The point is this tool, even in less than 10 minutes, had you immediately talking about productive things and vetting the things that most mattered and trying to get in your mind, what would a good decision look like before you made one? So consider how you might use this in pieces or parts. You don't have to do all of this or anything, but incorporating these principles the next time you have a decision to make collaboratively, so that you know that you're really in it together and that you know what a good decision looks like.